In this video, we'll take a look at how to draw a bird with graphite and white charcoal. We'll begin by drawing a collection of loose shapes which will combine for the overall form of the bird. Instead of starting with the contour lines, we can look at the individual shapes that make up the overall structure of the bird. This includes an oval for the center portion of the body and a couple of loose shapes for the tail end and the head of the bird. Of course, we'll also add a circle for the eye, a couple of triangular shapes for the beak, and simplified shapes for the visible wing as well. Now, if it helps you, you can always make notations where we notice areas of strong contrast between values. In this case, I'll define a shape on the side of the head where we have a light area right next to a dark area. We'll continue this process of defining shapes on down to the lower portion of the bird and define simplified shapes for each segment of each one of the legs. Of course, one of the legs is more visible in this scene than the other. And of course, we'll have our bird perched on something. In this case, it'll be a snapped off branch. So we'll simply define the shape here for that as well. Now, using a kneaded eraser, we'll clean up some of the loose lines that we've created. We use loose lines in the early stage because we have a greater chance of finding the correct line if we make several light, loose lines on the surface. Using these light, loose lines as a guide, we can now go back and define the contours a bit more, again sticking with the HB pencil. If we would have started the drawing by defining the contours or the outlines initially, we could have ran into some issues with distortion or proportional issues, but since we defined the shapes initially, we have more accuracy in the contour lines as we add them. Now at this point, we can go back and start to add some indications of some details, and in this case, most of the details are going to happen where we have areas of contrasting values. We have dark values next to light values. So that's what I'm doing at this point, is defining those locations of contrasting values, again by using shapes primarily. We can also refine certain elements in the scene as well at this point. In this case, I see that the side wing needs to be a little bit longer, so I'll extend it out. And then again, using the kneaded eraser, we can lightly erase or lift up some of the stray marks. Now we're ready to go back in and start to define the value range. Of course, value is the darkness or lightness of a color, so we're going to work on creating the dark darks and the light lights and all of the values or midtones in between. We'll start in the area of the eye simply because this is going to be a logical area of focus, and I'll define the darkest areas, but I'll leave a little bit of an area for highlight. Then we can define some of the darker values around the eye. Now, the directional strokes that I make with the pencil here are important because they help to define the texture and the overall form of the bird. So I'm trying to pull these lines out in the direction that the feathers grow from the head of the bird. I'm leaving a little bit of lighter value on the top. We'll go back and refine this with a bit of white charcoal, but in this case our light source is coming from above and slightly to the right, so these areas are going to be the strongest with lighter values. Now with a white charcoal pencil, I can start to define some of the lighter values. Again, this is going to be a process of pushing the lighter and darker values back and forth until we have a full range of value. And of course, the area of strongest highlight is going to happen on the top portion of the eye. It'll also happen on the top portion of the beak as well. So we'll go ahead and define these areas with a strong application of the white charcoal. Now, over the top of the head of the bird, we'll also create a few lighter values, but we'll allow this to mix a bit with the graphite so we have somewhat of a transition between lighter values and darker values. We'll also go ahead and fill in that area of lighter value that I defined earlier in the process by drawing a shape, again just underneath the eye. Now with a softer pencil, this time a 4B pencil, this is a softer graphite pencil, we'll go back in and start pushing some of the darker values even darker. Of course, again, this goes back to the fact that we're trying to create a full range of value, darks and lights, so that we have a more natural looking image. Now that we have this location defined, we can move on to our next section of the bird, and we're just going to work our way back from the head. And I'm going to use the HB pencil now and first lay down a light application of the graphite. Then using a blending stomp, I'm going to work this into the tooth or the texture of the paper just a bit to create an even application on the surface. Then with the white charcoal pencil, we'll begin to define some of the lighter values. There's a streak of lighter value that happens right behind the head, so we'll define that with the white charcoal pencil, and then we'll apply strokes over the top of the area of graphite that we applied. Again, we're considering the directional strokes that are made with the white charcoal pencil. We're trying to pull these strokes in the same direction that the small feathers grow. This will help, again, to create the illusion of texture as we develop the values. Now, of course, we want to push the contrast in value in this location and even further the illusion of texture. So we'll go back with an HB pencil that's nice and sharpened, and we can start to define some of the edges of some of these feathers. We'll actually pull out a few additional lines to further the illusion of texture in this area. Now on the lower portion of the bird, the texture is slightly different here, so this is why we're addressing this area separately. But again, I'll start with an application of the HB pencil, very light application, and then I'll work it in using the blending stump, and then again, we're going to follow the same process. I'm going to go right over the top of this with the white charcoal pencil, again, trying to pull strokes in the direction that the small feathers grow, and you can see how those directional lines kind of curve around the form of the body of the bird. This not only develops the illusion of texture, but it also helps to communicate the form of the bird as we do this as well. Now, a few of these strokes are going to be more defined, and that's going to, again, create more of that illusion of texture. Of course, we need to make the value on the bottom portion a little bit darker, and there is a strong area of cast shadow that happens right underneath that wing. So we'll go ahead and switch over to the 4B pencil, remember the softer graphite pencil, and define that strong shadow at this point. We'll also create a few darker marks on the bottom portion of the bird as well using that 4B pencil, and again we're going to pull strokes in the direction that the small feathers grow. Then using a blending stump, we can go back and soften up some of those stronger marks that were created with the 4B pencil, working that application into the tooth of the paper so we have a bit more of a solid application. We'll do the same on the bottom portion, and then we can just push those values a little bit further as we see fit. We can make that shadow as dark as we'd like so that it kind of feels like the body of the bird does curve around. Then back with the white charcoal pencil, we'll define a few more additional strokes. This time we won't blend them in. We'll allow these strokes to sit over the top of the values that we've developed, creating a good illusion of depth and a good illusion of texture as well. We'll add a few more marks with an HB pencil. Again, this is a sharpened HB pencil, so we've got some defined strokes. And then we'll move on to the top portion of the bird. Now, this is the area of the bird where we've got some areas of really strong contrast. They're really going to pop out and really make the drawing start to come together. So we'll define some of the darker values initially with an HB pencil, then we'll blend those in with the blending stump, and you can see this pattern developing on the back portion here. Then we'll go back with the white charcoal pencil and define the areas of lighter value that happen in these locations. Now, since we're working on a gray surface, we really have the opportunity to push those relationships between dark and light values, since we're using not only a dark medium with the graphite, but we're also using a light medium with the white charcoal. And if you've never tried this before, you ought to give it a shot because it really allows you to push that range of value. Of course, if you're working on a gray surface, you're starting at a middle value on the value scale. And this is going to allow you to push those values lighter and darker and really see that contrast. We work on white paper, of course, we're working with a dark medium, typically on a white surface. And then we have to start with the lighter values and just push everything to the darker end. So it's a little bit harder to push that range of value or create a full range of value. But when we work on a toned surface like this, we have the ability to really see that contrast in value as we add it to the surface, which can be quite exciting. We're going to go ahead and start to develop some of the smaller little feathers that happen right before we get to the main portion of the wing. Again, this is the area of strongest contrast, so we'll continue to work back and forth between the lighter values with the white charcoal applications and the darker values with the graphite applications. Areas where we need the value to be just a bit darker, we'll use that softer 4B pencil here and apply those strokes and then maybe work them in with the blending stump. Now, again, we've got this strong contrast that happens with the wing that extends out. We'll first define these areas with some strong strokes using the white charcoal pencil. Then we'll go back with the 4B pencil, skip the HB pencil completely, and we'll define some of the lines that happen in between the white strokes. And you can see how strong this contrast is at this point. In a few minutes, we'll go back and tone down that contrast just a bit, because at this point it is still too strong. Now, using the HB pencil, we could go back and tone that contrast down. We'll put just a bit of shadow, and with this HB pencil, I'm going right over the top of those white charcoal applications, so you can see the gray that's created by doing so. We'll also make a few of those smaller feathers pop out just a bit by applying an additional application of the white charcoal pencil. Then using the blending stump, we'll tone down a few of those applications, again lessening the contrast just a bit. Then we can address the tail end of the bird. In this case, we'll start with the white charcoal applications, and then we'll go back in, this time with an HB pencil initially, and define some of those darker areas. There's definitely less contrast in this location. The values are not quite as intense. So after we apply these applications of the graphite and the white charcoal, we'll go back with a blending stump and smooth out the transitions a bit between the dark and the light values. And then maybe with the 4B pencil, we'll go back and darken it just slightly. Again, the contrast is not quite as strong in the tail end. Now we can add a bit of value to the legs and the talons of the bird. Of course, the left leg is definitely less visible. We can still see a hint of it. Now, of course, the texture in this location is different from the texture that we saw on the body of the bird. Again, creating the illusion of texture in a drawing or painting is all dependent on the arrangement of the values, the dark and light values, of course. So in this case, we've got strong contrast that happens between the values, and that will lead to the illusion of the texture. We've got a strong shadow that exists underneath the bottom portion of the legs and underneath the bottom portion of each talon. And of course, there are a few strong lines that come up on the individual sections of the talon. And then we've got these strong highlights that exist on the upper portion of the talon of the legs. So of course, we'll allow those strong areas of dark and light value to exist there without much of a transition zone. In the body of the bird, we saw some areas where we had somewhat of a transition zone between dark and light values, some midtones that existed in those locations. In the talons and the legs, of course, those midtones don't really exist quite as much. We've got dark and light right next to each other. Once we've got the talons in place, we can go ahead and define the texture and the values, of course, that we see on the broken branch that the bird is perched on. In this case, I'll start by lightly indicating some of the locations of lighter value using the graphite pencil, and then of course I'll define these much stronger using the white charcoal pencil. Of course, our light source again is coming from above and slightly right, so most of these lighter values are going to exist on the right side of this branch. And then we can go back again initially with the HB pencil and darken in some of those locations of darker value. And here again, we're going to consider the directional strokes that are made with the graphite pencil. We're going to allow these strokes to flow with the cross contours of the form of the branch. So in that circular section up there near the top, we'll allow those strokes to go in a circular motion, but for the most part, these strokes are going to flow at a diagonal, at the same diagonal that the branch, the overall form of the branch flows in. We'll allow some of these marks to overlap the white charcoal applications, creating small areas of gradations of value, and then occasionally we'll allow some of the strokes to go in a more horizontal direction so that we can just break up the texture a little bit more and create that illusion a little bit further. Now, of course, we're going to darken up some of the areas in this location as well with the softer 4B pencil, and now our drawing of a bird perched on a broken branch is complete using graphite and white charcoal. If you're ready to learn more about drawing, then check out the Secrets to Drawing video course. You can click on the video to learn more about the course, which is the most comprehensive video course available for learning how to draw. We cover everything from the basics like line, shape, form, value, texture, color, and color theory. And we talk about each one of the traditional drawing media, including graphite, pen and ink, charcoal, colored pencils, oil pastels, and soft pastels, all while covering the traditional concepts of portrait drawing, landscape drawing, and figure drawing. You'll learn the core concepts behind seeing as an artist. You'll learn how to draw from observation and draw from photos. Now, there's more than just videos. Ebooks are included with the course as well.
Each module includes an illustrated ebook that is taken directly from the video included in the module. It includes images and a written commentary. There are 28 total modules in the course, which include 26 ebooks that total 178 pages. That's over 5 hours of video instruction. I hope you'll check out the Secrets to Drawing video course.